I mean, that happened much later in the Love and Rockets trajectory. That was like from
Okay.
a fourth album, the time that came out. And again, that was a very spontaneous thing that just happened in the studio, which was initiated by Daniel. We'd actually planned to record something else.
Bad decisions, bad decisions,
There are bands that define a moment, and there are bands that define a world. Bauhaus didn't invent Gothic rock so much as they conjured it. Four young men in Northampton, England, recording a 9-minute dirge about Bela Lugosi on the very first day they walked into a studio. That was 1979. That song, Bela Lugosi's Dead, is still playing somewhere in the world right now. It never stopped. David J. Haskins has been a bass player, a songwriter, a novelist, a filmmaker, a visual artist, and a poet. He has been one half of Love and Rockets. He has gone solo, he's gone deep, and he's gone wherever his instincts have led him. And somehow, every road has led somewhere genuinely interesting. He is one of the quieter forces in bands known for the theatrical. And in that quiet, some of the most interesting things have happened. David J., welcome to Bad Decisions.
Thank you, Scott. That was a wonderful intro.
Thank you. So let's start with the origin story. Take me back to Northampton. Paint me a picture who David was like growing up and what kind of town it was back then.
Well, the town was kind of bleak, grey, a market town. The industry there is the boot and shoe industry. That's what Northampton's known for. So there's factories. They also have a brewery there, the Carlsberg Brewery.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of factories, and the town itself was ever expanding. Certainly in the 70s and 80s, where there was an influx of people coming in from London, and we refer to that as the London overspill. And these people were coming in, occupying uh, pretty sort of low rent accommodation on what we call the new estates, which are really like the projects here. So
Right.
it was a pretty rough element that came in, and Northampton, born and bred, tend to be pretty rough as well. So it was kind of a tough town, very tough actually. A lot of violence in the streets, especially when they kicked everybody out of the pubs at 11 o'clock. Um, and I, along with my cohorts who later on became the band, were very much weirdo outsiders, and we felt somewhat intimidated by the environment that we were born into, but we were also very strong in our sense of individuality and our right to be weird. So and then I went to art school. Daniel went to art school. My brother went to art school. Kevin, Peter almost went to art school. So we were, arty farties, and
What
it was very natural that we all kind of end up in this orbit, and from that came the band.
what were your parents creatives?
My mum was definitely creative, although she never really pursued it. I mean, she would paint, she would do these daubs, flowers mainly, still life, and she had a really good ear. She could pick out any tune on the radio on a piano. Not that we ever had a piano, which was odd because I did gravitate to the piano whenever we used to visit my nan, who was up in Birmingham, and she had a stand up like an old pub piano, and I would literally run from as soon as we got in the door to that piano and start plinking and plonking on it. But strangely enough, my parents did not pick up on this fact, and they did not buy me a piano. So it was a treat, whenever I went up north, I would go and play on the piano. But yeah, my mum
Sure,
certainly had
they
leanings.
were yeah, they were costly. I mean, if you look back at even, the early royal time, if you had money, you had a piano. If you didn't, you maybe had a chessboard.
Yeah.
But there weren't a lot of outlets, were
Yeah.
there?
Well, my parents were very working class, were very poor, but they made their way, and they were both. Well, my mum was a real grafter, and she was very kind of savvy business wise. And my dad, he put in the work, and they built a very successful newsagent and tobacconist, like a street corner shop that
Very
took off
cool.
in the 70s, late 70s and early 80s. Actually, in the 60s,
What was the name of the shop?
just Haskins, newsagent and tobacconist. And that was actually the scene of our Bauhaus's first rehearsal room, which was in this little pokey office on top of the shop area.
And did the music sort of come together collaboratively, interactively? I mean, obviously you were creating trend, you weren't following it. So where did the inspiration to do something really outside of what had been going on previously?
Well, that goes back to the seminal times of like the early 70s and the early glam music. David Bowie came on the scene and blew our minds when we were 14. My brother was
You know,
what,
so
12. And then T-Rex, Mark Bolan, that was huge. Roxy Music, those were really the three, and that really had a huge impression on me and my contemporaries. And Kevin and I, we would start off. I once told this story to Tony Visconti, who, as you know, I'm sure, produced T Rex
sure,
and Mark Bolan, Mark and
of course.
David Bowie. So what we would do is I would buy the new T Rex single as soon as it came out, right, on the 7-inch single, and play it to death. And then I got this inspired idea to. We had a, a TIAC reel-to-reel tape recorder. It was actually my parents, but I got the idea of what if we were to make our own recordings by putting on a T-Rex single, and I'll sing over the top. I'll try and warble like Mark, and my brother, he had these literally two flower pots as his congas, his bongos, and we would record ourselves over the top of Hot Love or something. And God, I wished I still had those tapes. But that was the start, really. And then just the magic of like playing that back, although it's ridiculous, it was kind of magical.
But it's not. I think limitations are where true creativity comes from. When I look back at, the early Beatles, pre-Sergeant Pepper were 4 tracks, and then Pepper was 8 tracks. And now I walk into the recording studio down the street and there's a 110 input SSL, and I'm like, I feel like with filmmaking too, like you look at the Clint Eastwood school, he came up with whatever 15,000 feet of film, and when you were done using that film, it was over. So you had to really think about what you were doing. You had to rehearse, you had to prepare, and you used the tools that were available to you. Pink Floyd, the same thing.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I'm a huge proponent of that, of you know, relishing your limitations and letting the imagination come into play. And yeah, I love that. And that's actually something that we later on, Bauhaus, we self-imposed that on ourselves, even though the band, had become successful to a great degree, and we did have big studios at our disposal. Rather than go to those places, we elected to go to the original demo studio in Wellingborough, Beck Studios, where we recorded Bella Lugosi's Dead. It's a very cheap studio with very limited gear, but it had a vibe and it had a great engineer in Derek Tompkins, who was the owner and the guy who built this gear. It was homemade equipment, and it just had something about it. And we loved the limitations of that. So I totally agree with you. Yeah.
And you guys had a great sound, and so many young artists fall victim to their elders. Like I look at that whole time period, which made some great records, but I look at that pre-Nirvana period where everything sounded like was just bathed in reverb and wetness and big drums in live rooms and eventide harmonizers, and everything was starting to sound the same. And then all of a sudden, Nevermind came out and the Pumpkins came out, and it was raw and it sounded like guys with musical instruments in a room. So I think, it's like a sine wave, right?
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, along those lines, what made a huge impact on me, and again, my contemporaries, was punk and
Yeah.
1976. And that was galvanizing. I mean, just prior to that, you had the pub rock bands, and I was into seeing those bands in London, like bands like Dr. Feelgood, I don't know, Rugulator, Kilburn and the High Roads. And that was like the year before punk. That was, well, 74, 75. And that was the only thing that was in any way exciting. But really, what was very prominent at that time were these overblown, sort of pretentious, proggy rock bands who were very sort of overblown and not relevant to the lives that us ordinary kids were living. And then suddenly, the Sex Pistols explode on the scene, and the Clash. I went to see the Pistols and the Clash at the 100 Club in 1976, and that was it. Like that just changed everything. And like a lot of kids that went to see Pistols at that time, we formed a band there. And then I went with my brother, with Kevin, and I said, "This is it. This is like this is it." And
Yeah.
the
I felt the
band,
same way, and I was a little kid.
yeah, and really that was kind of like the very genesis of what became Bauhaus, because we certainly came out of that post punk, you know.
Makes sense. I remember one morning I was taking a hike up Runyon Canyon with Jonesy, and I said to him, I said, when I was a little kid, there were only two records I was not allowed to listen to. None of us were." And he said, "What were they?" And I said, "Richard Pryor's Wanted and the Sex Pistols' Nevermind the Bollocks." And he said, "Why?" And I said, I don't know. Looking back on it, like I don't understand, but they were so, Malcolm McLaren, in large part, had a great thing, deal to do with really making an impression. Like if the Queen hates you, you've done a pretty good job.
Yeah, McLaren was the arch provocateur, along with John Lydon, of course.
Of course. How did you meet Peter Murphy?
I met him through Daniel. They used to be at school together. I mean, like junior school, and they were very young, like 7 years old. And again, it's the situation where they were complete outsiders in this very rough school. St Mary's was a really like notoriously rough Catholic school, and they were these rather effete, arty kids, and so they get picked on a lot, and they bonded over that. Uh, and then Daniel, see, I was in several bands with Daniel prior to Bauhaus, along with my brother, and there was another kid who was my best friend at school, Dave Exton. He was the guitarist in the punk band that we formed that night, go and see the Pistols. And then Daniel nearly joined that band. We never actually played because there was actually a kickback against us in Northampton, because we played 3 gigs and they got increasingly more riotous, and they actually pulled the plugs on the third one, which was kind of an accomplishment in its own right. But
For
and then
sure.
we brought Daniel in to play another one, and then we couldn't get a book in, so that kind of dissipated. But then we made a new band, and it's kind of like a post punk, almost like a power pop kind of band. And then there were various other bands that fell apart, and there were other bands that came along that just lasted for a couple of weeks, and then it all really dissipated. I had an offer to go to Germany to play on American air bases in a band that did exclusively covers of disco and funk. So I was woodshedding, ready to go
Hmm.
to Hamburg, um, and I was just like working out all these disco and funk tracks, like 60 of them on the bass. And Daniel contacted me and he said, I'm forming this new band. And my old friend Peter Murphy's the singer. I'm not sure about him. He said, I appreciate it if you could just come down and give me your opinion. So I went down to where they were rehearsing, and I saw they had about 4 songs, original songs, which they played. And I was totally blown away by Peter. I mean, he was just sort of beaming charisma, and he had this
Yeah.
great voice, this sonorous voice that he could hit high notes. and he was like a born star. You know, there is a star shining in this little teachers training college mobile classroom, which is their rehearsal room. So Daniel goes over to me very quietly after the session. He goes, "What do you think?" I said, "Daniel, he's solid gold." So that was that, and I really wanted to join that band. They had another bass player. The thing was, I totally got it because prior to that, I'd been kind of like the band leader in all the bands, and
Right.
I kind of called the shots. And this was Daniel's baby, and he didn't want me invading the pram, as it were.
Sure.
And he had this bass player, and it was just like like a guy that just played what he was told.
A hired gun.
Right. And then I was about to
Hitting
leave, literally about to leave, and I got Daniel knocking on my door. I remember it was pissing down with rain. He looked like a drowned rat. I said, "Come in." I said, "What's up?" He goes, "Do you want to join the band?" I said, "Well, I'm leaving for Germany like in 2 days." He said, "You want to join the band?" I said, "Well, yeah, actually I do, but I've got this commitment." He said, "Listen to this cassette, see what you think." And he gave me a cassette that they just recorded in the classroom rehearsal room, and it was great. It really had something. So I called up the band leader from the other band, and he was very, very gracious. And he said, "No, we got another guy can do the gig. Go do it." You know. So I got my blessing from that guy.
Kismet. So I always wonder about rhythm section people. Bass is a funny instrument. It's so necessary, but it's not something that you can sit around and play around a campfire. What made you and your brother decide to become a rhythm section?
Well, I think with Kevin, it all started with those flower pots. You know, he just sort of gravitated to doing that, and he was a natural drummer. He's such an excellent drummer as well, and he just
Sure
had
is.
an aptitude for it. And he was trained by a jazz guy called Keith Cumberbatch, who was just a local jazz cat, and so he was tutored in that style. If you notice, Kevin holds his sticks in the jazz mode, like Charlie Watt,
Yeah.
like that.
Traditional grip.
That, yeah, very subtle.
Yeah.
So, and Kevin's a very subtle player. But God, once he got a little kit, he was just on that thing for hours and hours, much to the chagrin of our neighbours. And me, my very first musical love was reggae when I was like 13. And me and my mates, we'd sneak into the skinhead discos. And the skinheads were exclusively into reggae. And that's all they played. And it was very good reggae. And they played it loud, and it was in the dark, and it was very potent and powerful. And I loved it. And I loved the bass. So at school, when David Bowie came along and Ziggy Stardust, everybody wanted to be in a band. And there were about 5 of us at school who wanted to form a band, and they all wanted to be Mick Ronson. Nobody
Sure.
wanted to be Trevor Bolder. But so I volunteered, and I just the first bass. Well, at that time I didn't have a bass. I had a really cheap 6-string electric guitar, so I just took the top 2 strings off, turned all the bass up on my amp, turned all the treble down, and that was my first bass guitar, an approximation of a bass guitar. But I loved it.
It works. So Bauhaus lasted 5 years and made 5 albums. In that time, you built something that will outlast all of you. If my research is done correctly, Bela Lugosi was your first day in the studio. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So walk me through that session, because it's not typical for somebody to do their first professionally recorded thing that's a 9+ minute song. Walk me through the session, because the thing you made never stopped existing. What was in the room? Describe that day.
Well, the room itself was kind of funky. It had this stained, like coffee stained orange brown carpet. The gear was very basic, as I say. There was a little kitchenette with the coffee making facility and a teapot. Formica tabletops, and then the control room was adjacent to the one main room. There was a huge homemade plate echo that Derek had built himself and installed that was fantastic sounding. And then the control room itself, you had to sort of make your way through a haze of cigarette smoke because Derek was just constantly smoking cigarettes, exploding ashtrays all over the place. You know, and it had that stench. And then at the end of that foggy room was the homemade desk that sounded great, you know. And he had an echo, this analog echo unit with tape spools running around it, a bit like an Echoplex. That I think that was homemade as well. Because in Northampton there's a big Rastafarian community, so we would get the Rastas coming in doing reggae. So he was au fait with that music, that genre, and even dub, you know, which we were into. So when we said we want to apply dub echo techniques to this track, you know, he understood what we meant. Although he just sort of gave us carte blanche. He said, "There you go, boys, you do it." Daniel actually did that. He put all the dub echoes on the instruments. And we had, apart from Bella, we had 4 other tracks that we wanted to record. And we did. We recorded all those tracks in one day and mixed them. And it cost us about...
You recorded and mixed them in a day, like Sun Studio style?
Everything done, and it cost us about $120.
It's a good return on investment, David.
Yeah, somewhat. It was very inspiring.
I did not know that.
Right, and we recorded all like playing at the same time. I don't think it was maybe one overdub. In vocals and all, just like...
So basically live.
Yes.
Incredible. So tell me about if you would, the collaborative process. You know, we all know what everybody plays in the band, but as far as assembly, songwriting, all of that, how does that work?
Well, there are different collaborations, you know. I mean, there's different chemistry with every collaboration and different ways of naturally working together. With Bauhaus, it was very instinctual, and we'd never discuss anything. We just go in and pick up instruments. Peter would pick up the microphone, and we just start making, you know, an unholy racket, basically, and just keep going. And then something would emerge out of that was strong. It's sort of like survival of the fittest. And we would all, without even talking about it, latch on to that thing, whatever it was. It could be a bass line. It could be a guitar riff. It could be a vocal line. It could be a drum pan, you know. But it's just like you're listening to each other and you're in a kind of semi-trance state, and you just let that element rise and follow it. It's a bit like surfing.
So it's just pure alchemy.
Yeah. And then you go with that, and everybody falls in with that idea that's emerged, or that element. And then you stop, and maybe we would record it on a cassette player, then play it back and like identify what was good about it, what was working. Then we start to hone it, and then you hone it some more. And that's the process. That was the process with us.
And how did you convince the powers that be to get on board with such a bold new direction in music?
Well, we recorded an acetate, which is like it's like vinyl
Test
disc.
pressing.
Pressing, basically, yeah. And we had that, and we had a couple of copies, and we would just send them out to record labels. We sent one to Friction. I remember we got I did an event with Lowell Tolhurst the other week, Santa Cruz. Mm-hmm. So we were talking about this, and I said, yeah, we sent Bella to your label because they signed The Cure. And then we got a letter back from Mr. Perry, who's the head of the label, saying that it was a rejection letter, saying that this is far too long. He suggested that we edited it down considerably, and maybe we'll think about that, and then come back. But another label we sent it to was Small Wonder Records, also in London, and Pete Stennett, the guy who ran that, totally got it. And we had this comment like from other labels. It's great and it's weird and interesting, but it needs to be shorter. So we started kind of second guess ourselves. So by the time we got to Small Wonder and Pete Stennett loved it, we said, "Do you think it needs to be a bit shorter though, Pete?" And he said, "No way." And he gave the example, the comparison of the Velvet Underground Sister Ray. He says, that's a really long track. You want to hear every second of that. You want to hear all the noises, all the feedback, the echo. Don't touch this. He said, you've made some magic, and I want to put it out on my label.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's a real painting. A piece unique.
Thank you. I remember we went down to the store. He didn't actually tell us. He invited us down to the store, and he didn't tell us that he was going to sign us until he didn't say anything. He said, "I just want to play your record." Shut up. So we played the record in the store. We put the closed sign on the door. It's in Walthamstow. It's a record store, and we listened to it, and that's when he said what he said. Yeah, I want this on the label, and he said, "We're going to celebrate, boys." I said, "Great." And he goes to the window. At that time, Elvis Costello had come out with his first album, and there was a cardboard cutout of Elvis playing the guitar in the window, and behind that was a big bag of weed in the shop window that Pete pulled out and rolled up these spliffs, and so we celebrated.
Fantastic. So the Gothic label that's followed Bauhaus everywhere, and I know it's always been complicated. What did the label get right, and what did it flatten?
Well, it flattened a lot because Bauhaus was so eclectic and so sort of far-reaching, and we were always reaching for really things that musical expression modes of that were really a stretch for us. We hadn't been playing long, but I think part of that element made for a certain kind of tension and excitement in the music. When you're reaching for something that's just a little bit beyond your musical ability, I think in that area, some very interesting things can happen. Yeah. I'm sorry, I've lost my train of thought there. I went right off there.
That's okay. We were just talking about the controversy of the Gothic label.
Oh, the Gothic, yeah. So in that way, sort of Goth denied that expansiveness, But then again, I completely get it. I mean, we were also very enamored of that kind of romantic melancholia and, the atmosphere of, it's a romantic thing, really, just beautiful decay. Just,
it's amazing how impactful you guys were on artists that ultimately became, far bigger. Who say Bauhaus would never have happened. We would never have happened without Bauhaus. Like, it was so influential.
Yeah.
You ended
annoying.
Say again?
It's very gratifying, but a bit annoying.
Well, someone has to be first through the door, I guess, right? So you guys ended in 1983, the year I graduated from high school. What actually happened, and was there a moment that you knew it was over before it officially was?
Well, that had been on the cards for quite a long time. Internal friction, you might say. And there was one night in particular. We played this big gig in London, and the thing was growing all the time. and we just started to make an impact in America as well. And so it was just up on the up and up. And then we were scheduled to do this TV show. It was a very high profile show at the time, and they wanted us to play 2 songs, and we were scheduled to do that. We did this gig in London, and then we got back to the hotel. That gig was at the Hammersmith Palette. And we got back to the hotel, and the friction had got so extreme. We couldn't even like bear to be in the same rooms together. And I remember
So more personal than creative friction?
that was entirely
Both.
personal. It was really entirely personal. Um,
And just none of you weren't getting along? Not Peter, not Daniel, not you, not Kevin? Nice, I met.
I think the what followed with Love and Rockets is an indication of the faction division. If you get
Oh,
my
that's a
meaning.
fair point. Yeah, for sure. And let's jump into that. So, couldn't tell you the year, maybe 87, sometime in the mid 80s. I saw Love and Rockets. I hadn't heard of Love and Rockets yet, but someone had tickets and asked me if I wanted to go see them at the Hollywood Palladium. And I hadn't lived here yet. I was here on holiday. And I went there and I said, what an interesting band. What interesting music. And they're wearing bee costumes. So, it was a very different animal from Bauhaus, and almost immediately it started to go. So talk about that.
Yeah. So obviously there was less friction between us three. There was a little. What we did share as well was a love of psychedelia that Peter wasn't into really at all. So although it did come out in some ways in Bauhaus, you can see this kind of dark psychedelic element to it.
Yeah.
But it was somewhat suppressed because obviously, a band is an expression of the interests of all the members. And, and certainly with things like Bowie, glam rock, Roxy, T-Rex, we all love that. So that really came through stronger. So the genre that was suppressed really, came out. And it was also very timely because at that time in the mid-80s, there was a bit of a psychedelic renaissance. There's a Paisley Underground happening in San Francisco. And there was a kind of rediscovery of things like bands like Love, who I adored, and early Pink Floyd, Syd Barrett, and all of that. And it just, there was something in the air, There was some good acid going around at that time, which really helped things. And all of this sort of just fell into place. And we flew with it.
You sure did. So Alive was a genuine hit, a real live pop hit. What was it like to have that land? And after everything Bauhaus had been, did it feel like vindication, or did it complicate things for you personally?
A bit of both. I mean, that happened much later in the Love and Rockets trajectory. That was like from the 4th album, the time that came out. And again, that was a very spontaneous thing that just happened in the studio, which was initiated by Daniel. We'd actually planned to record something else, and he got in early, and he was just messing around with the guitar, and that riff came to him. So Daniel gets like tunnel vision, which is a good thing in many ways, because once he's got a bee in his bonnet, he pursues it. But nothing else can come into focus. So he was into this thing, and he said, "Like, do you mind if I just pursue this? So I'm going down into the basement. This guitar, I think I've got something good here." So we said, me and Kev said, "Yeah, okay, great." Made a cup of tea, and then we made another cup of tea, and then he appeared. And he says, "Okay, listen to this," and he basically played that song, which is very simple, but it's very effective. And so Kevin and I just picked up our instruments and started playing along with him. And we just kind of jammed it through very briefly. And then the engineer, John Fry, said, "This sounds great, guys. I'm going to roll tape." So it's like, okay. and we ended up recording that, that day. And it was very apparent to us there was something real special when we listened to the mix back. And then it obviously, as you know, it became very successful. We were kind of taken aback by how successful. And I remember this moment when we had a tour in New York, in America, and we got to New York, flew from London to New York, and we got in a cab, and the cab driver, who the previous year would not have known us, he started singing "So Alive." He said, "I know you guys. I heard you on the
That's
radio."
amazing.
Yeah, that's when we knew like it'd gone to another level.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, and then but then we started playing to further, answer your question about the complexity. We started playing this tour. We had the Pixies open for us, which was great. We'd always select
Amazing.
our own opening bands, and that was one of our
Sure.
favorites. And I remember they were adding dates on the tours it went on because it was so popular, and also the changing the venues to bigger venues. It was like snowballing, And we started to notice the audience changed, and we were getting a lot of very young teenage girls coming in, and they obviously only knew that song, and so us being us, we went a little bit mad and decided to fuck with this. So we'd come on some of these gigs to come on and just be like Throbbing Gristle and play a wall of sound just to fuck with the little girls. And yeah, that kind of backfired.
It beats being in Rush where there's no women in the audience, right?
What's that?
I said it beats being in Rush where there are no women in the audience, right?
I would concur with that. Yeah, I've never got that. But then some of like the old guard audience, they kind of loved that we'd done that because it was like it was punk rock, and it was just we can't like kind of sell out and become this, one hit wonder pop group. We're much more than that, So with the thing with all the bands, it's always been about authenticity. That's the main thing that has to be there. We're satisfying ourselves, really. And that's the way that you can deeply satisfy an audience, is when you are being true to yourself and being authentic, and the audience reads that.
I agree with that. All the great art has come from one of ones, not one of 1,000s, and not pandering to trends. So through all of this, you've had a solo career running. You've done novels, you've done film scores, art installations, poetry. Where does the solo work live differently from your band work? Or is it all just creativity?
It's all creativity. And in the solo work, I usually bring in other players, and I love to collaborate. I really adore that. I'm doing more and more of that. It's the thing of what William Burroughs and Brian Geising refer to as the third mind, where this element is created from, in that. The origin of that is because there's two artists coming together, so it creates this third, almost like a third entity that could only exist through that collaboration. Whereas if you're just really solo, then it's only going to go in one way, So you bring in these other elements. Although sometimes I do relish just being alone, in the shed, and nobody there to influence it in any way. I think it's very healthy just to change that up all the time,
I could not agree with you more. Like it was very rewarding writing this book, but
I've
I also
been
sometimes
dipping into that, by the way, and it's very enjoyable. It's very rich.
thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
And that was fun. But, there's also times where I miss being on a big scale photo shoot with all brilliant artists, great hair and makeup and wardrobe and talent, and collaborating and making a painting together, and that community, and that sort of, some of the parts being greater than the whole.
sure.
So I think it's all a balancing act. It's all creativity. And I think it all matters.
Yeah, yeah. I do. When I'm away from it, I do miss. Just made me think of this. Just what you said. I miss the big gigs. I do relish those big gigs with that can only happen with the major bands. Um, there's something about that. It's just so ecstatic. And sharing with a huge like 20,000 people. I mean, sometimes we play to like 50,000, and it really does produce a heightened state of consciousness. But having said that, I also really love playing in people's living rooms, and I've been doing that for a long time. And there's something real special about that, and I love the intimacy of that. I love the connectiveness of it, and the control, the focus of that. So
Yeah, there couldn't have been that when I saw you at Agape Lodge at Vanessa's thing, there couldn't have been more than 25 people in the audience. And what a night that was. You and Jesse Hughes and Ryan Adams and Luke Spiller. That was a very special evening.
yeah, I wasn't. I don't know if you know, but I wasn't going to do anything that night. Vanessa had asked. I said that on the stage. I just wanted a low key night, just in the audience, be one of the punters. But then when it was the announcement was made that it was Andy Warhol's death day, that just sparked something in my head, and I thought, oh, maybe I could have done something about Andy or relating to Andy adjacent, and I just started writing that. Were you there when I read that piece?
Yes, I was.
Yeah.
I videoed it, in fact.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. So I wrote that, in just a few minutes, and thought, okay, I want to do this, and then I roped in Joey, the guitar and loops. I said, Joey, do you have anything like loops? And he said, oh yeah, I've got these loops that we were going to use tonight, but we're not now. But we could use them. And I said, great, and some feedback guitar. So we just did that very spontaneously, and I didn't know that Joe D'Alessandro was going to be there, and he was sitting right in front of me, little Joe from the factory, who I talked to afterwards. Quite a character. And when I
I
got
didn't know that until just now.
what's that?
I didn't know that until just now.
Oh yeah,
I
yeah,
didn't realize he
yeah,
was there.
yeah. And then yeah, I was out. I went outside afterwards, and he was out there. He wanted a cigarette. I wanted a cigarette, and he was fumbling for his lighter. So I lit his Marlboro, and then I talked to him about. I said I think we got some mutual friends. He's very brusque. He's very kind of cantankerous, as you would kind of want him to be.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah. I said, he goes, who's that? I said, John Giorno. Who? I said, John Giorno, the poet, because he was like a fixture at the factory. He's a good friend of mine. John Giorno? I said, yeah, he was the guy in Andy's movie, The Sleep, like the 7-hour movie. Oh, right. Then he goes, I hate fucking poetry, man. And the guy comes out, is driving him, and he goes, hey, 10 minutes and we're getting the fuck out of here. I fucking hate poetry, man. So yeah, that's little Joe.
That's so great.
Anyway, so when I got back home, I wrote a poem about him.
That's great. I loved it. I didn't know it was unplanned, but to me it felt like peak falling apart Vincent van Gogh. It felt just like paint splattered all over the ceilings and everywhere, and just kind of hanging your ass out over the edge. And that's kind of what I liked about it. It was like jazz.
I love that. I love teetering on the precipice I love, and quite often leaping into the abyss. I fucking love that. It inspires me more than anything. I love it
It
when,
was courageous and it was cool.
yeah, when things are like going wrong. No, these things are. It's if things are not going as planned, but this could be a gift, and go with it. You know, and that was always a big part of Bauhaus. It certainly remained a big part of my MO in creativity in the studio and on stage. Very much in the studio. I mean, I know Brian Eno is of the same mind, you know, and I
Yeah.
love that. That's where the magic lies, you know. There's a crack in everything. That's where the light gets in, as Leonard Cohen say.
Yeah. So let's talk memoir for a few minutes. What compelled you to write it, and what surprised you about what you found when you look back?
I did feel compelled to write that story because I'd seen journalists write, you know, a lot of rubbish about the band, and it's an insider's take on it, you know. And it's like I couldn't suppress that if I wanted to. It's just like bubbling up. So I just set about putting it down on paper, and also it was a kind of act of catharsis in a way because it had been
Sure.
very intense experience, and by writing that, I felt it did have the effect of release and kind of coming to terms with that experience. I'm actually in the process of writing what I thought was going to be an addendum to that book because that book ends, the Bauhaus memoir book ends 2006, which at the time I was convinced that was the end. And it always ends for the same reason. In that, you know, basically, we have a singer who is intolerable, basically, to be honest. But who's very, very talented and incredibly charismatic and all of the rest of it. And he's a great artist. So it's this push and pull thing. Anyway, but is it worth it? You know. And then
I mean, I think that's singers, though, isn't it? You know, like it seems like singers are the common denominator of being difficult.
So it would seem. And then you know, I did reunite with Peter. He asked me to play. It was the 40th anniversary of our first album in the Flat Field. This was in 2018, and he asked me to come on board and play on tour with him. And there was just something about it that I thought, yeah, I'd actually be into this. And I was kind of missing playing those songs, you know, live. And the band were really great. The two other members, Mark Slutsky on drums and Mark Gemini Thwaite on guitar. And they're great guys. I know them. And it was appealing. And I thought, yeah, okay. You know, quadruple the money you're offering me. And it's on. And it was on. And then same thing, you know, that was an incredibly harrowing experience. In some ways, even more extreme than in Bauhaus. The things that happened, very extreme.
It's challenging. I remember the Crosby, Stills, and Nash scene. Graham's kids are friends of mine, and I remember I was sitting in Graham's living room one day, and I had interface with Stephen and David, and I said, Graham, I got to ask you a question. How do you do tours with these knuckleheads, you know, for lack of a better word? And he said, Scott, we never see each other. We see each other in rehearsals, different planes, different buses, different everything. We see each other on stage, and it's a business, and we have a business together. Right. And I guess, you know, sort of whatever it takes.
Yeah, yeah. But the thing is, it's a shame because it's always been so fraternal with us.
Sure.
Amidst all the or punch ups and, you know, all of for that friction. It's always been very bondy. It's been very much like a gang, and the feeling of like we are the gang, and that comes from being those weirdo outsiders in Northampton, and that bonds you together in such a strong way. And the music is an expression of what you're feeling in that situation, and we always have retained that, and also the playing of the music live was always an exorcism for us. And whatever the beef was that was going down, at the end of those 90 minutes, we'd come off stage and it would be dissipated, and we'd be friends again, like real friends. So that carried on, you know, and it carried on this tour in 2018, and then we got an offer, really good offer, for the complete band to reform and play 3 shows in LA. It was going to be 2 shows, and they added the third one at the Palladium in LA in 2019, and that went really well. Although again, fraught with all sorts of shenanigans behind the scenes, but we wanted to carry on because it had been so strong, and like just the outpouring of. I mean, those shows sold out in minutes, and that's a big venue.
Of course.
You know? And so we wanted to carry on, and of course, what comes along is hello COVID. You just put the kibosh on that. But we're all the way through COVID. We were planning with our agent to go out. We draw up these prospective tours, you know, world tours, and playing really prestigious venues. Like we had a big show we were going to do at the Radio City Music Hall, which I'd always wanted to play. They even started designing the posters, you know, which were beautiful. And it's like, we're going to do this in a year, you know, like, great, okay. And we're looking all the time. It's like, is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen because of COVID? Where are we with COVID figures? Look at this. It ain't going to happen, guys. It's going to be another year. It's like, okay. So we're hanging on, you know. Then finally, we get through that. And it's all set up, ready to go. And we start, you know, we're playing Cruel World. We did 2 nights there that were just incredibly, magical, I use the word again. Played on the night of the full blood moon. And we didn't, not that we timed this, we could have, but we didn't. We were playing Bela Lugosi's Dead as the red moons rises, you know. It's just talk about a show. Very powerful. And then we did some more dates in the States, and we went to Europe, and then the plan was to come back to the States and do a huge tour. But things went from bad to worse in Europe to such a degree that it forced our hand, and we could not do that tour of America, and it broke my heart, and a lot of fans' hearts, I know. But anyway, it was very circuitous. But all of this I'm writing about because I have to tell this complete story. As I said,
Sure.
I thought it was going to be an addendum, but I think it's a separate book, actually.
And do you feel like you guys get along better as friends on the field or off the field? Like when you're not making music together, are you still in touch? Are you still close?
When we're not making music together, we never see each other. Even
Never chat on the phone.
I don't know. I used to with Daniel. I used to, like, but that's kind of gone away.
It's funny. It's like trying to rekindle things with an ex. At first, you're nostalgic and romantic about it, and then you're like,
Yeah,
a few dates in, you're like, oh, now I remember why we split up.
yeah. She does that thing.
I forgot about that. Yeah, because I have a tendency to be romantic about all of my exes, yet they all ended for a reason. And I think I hear a lot of band stories like
And they're
this too.
thinking, oh, he does that thing about me.
100%. 100%. Human beings are hard. So who are some of the artists, painters, writers, filmmakers, not musicians, who have shaped you?
God, Scott, there's so many. Well, Well, I went to art school right direct from leaving regular school, and there I was exposed to a lot of things that stay with me. Um, Although I was exposed, I was going to say surrealism, but I was actually exposed to that when I was at school, when I was about like 11. And there was a kid there and he had his book and I was fascinated by the cover. I remember we used to play cricket. And so with cricket, there's a lot of just hanging about. If you're, especially if you're like batting and you're just waiting and to go on. And not that I was ever a great cricketer, but so I'm about 11, and this kid, Alistair Bickley, he was a very bookish kid, very kind of a swatty kid, very, very intelligent. And he would always have interesting books. And he had this one book, and it had this, it was a cover was a Rene Magritte image of a man in a typical, like, Magritte gentleman in a business suit and a bowler hat, standing next to a fish that was same size as him. And I was so intrigued by this. And I asked if I could borrow the book. And I'm looking through this book and it's like blowing my mind, seeing all this surrealism. And Andre Breton and Dali and, the usual suspects. And so then I went big into surrealism. But that was very seminal, formative. But then when I got to art school, I joined the underground film club, and so we would be privy to these movies that were truly underground, from the classic, from the 60s and early 70s, and I loved all of that. Saw the Warhol films as well. It's the first time I saw Chelsea Girls on the multiple screens, and I love that. So, and then things like just pop art, outside of Warhol, Rauschenberg. But beyond that, there's some conceptual stuff as well that wasn't that into, like performance stuff. But it was always very sort of intellectually stimulating. And that was a great art school to go to, and then college, and they had some really good lecturers who were very good artists in their own right. And very early when you mentioned Vincent van Gogh, yeah, I love Van Gogh's work, and I've seen it, in the flesh. It's only one of two times where I've shed a tear looking at a painting. I saw that in Holland.
Me too. I got the great luxury of getting a private tour of the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam on an eighth of mushrooms, and let me tell you something. This was a pivotal moment of my life.
I could see how that would work. Yeah,
yeah.
I was looking
surf
at
and
the
turf.
crows were really like one of his last paintings, and the cornfield and the crows, and just the way he painted those crows, the energy and the sentiment and the depth of feeling just in those strokes of paint,
Yeah, it burns a hole through you, and it's a picture of a painting. You will never feel what it actually does. Like, I didn't understand Mark Rothko until I stood in front of one, and I was like, "Holy shit! I can't catch my breath."
Yeah, it's very powerful. Also,
I remember I was looking at it, and I didn't want to leave, and a friend said to me, "How could someone ever pay $40 million for something like this?" I said, "When you see something like this, what is money?"
Yeah, it truly is priceless. Yeah. The other time I
So
cried.
let me ask you. Go ahead.
Sorry, go on.
No. Tell me about the other time.
The other time I shed a tear was it's a painter called Cecil Collins, who was part of quite an obscure English school, like post-war, Second World War school of painting, and but very kind of spiritual. But similar, I see it sort of going back to the English tradition of You know when the name's there and it's like a little fish and it just swam away into the silver water. That just happened to me. Oh my god.
I'll put it in the description if you can't remember it.
Hmm. I'm not sundowning.
That's
Come back, little name. It's actually a big name. Oh, for God's sake. It's so tantalizing. It's out of my grip.
that's we'll see if it comes back.
When I talk about something else, it's going to come back. And I'll just blurt out its name and then you'll know what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Anyway,
With the benefit of
go
ahead. With the benefit of hindsight, if you could sit across from the version of yourself that walked into that Northampton studio for the first time, what would you tell him?
Don't worry about that bum note, kid. I played a bum, what I perceived to be a bum note. I mean, there's always a degree of atonality in the fretless instrument.
Sure.
And it's a question of, is that permissible or not? Is that jazz or is it rubbish? And there was one note that I was obsessing over in Bela Lugosi, and it was just really bugging me. This is when we're there and then, like, playback. And so I mentioned this to Derek, the engineer. I said, Derek, I'm really bothered about that note. Just, you bothered about that note? All right, look at this. He gets a razor blade. I've never seen anybody do this before. And he goes over to the tape, and starts like lining it up, and then gets a razor blade, and he's going to slice the tape. I said, what the bloody hell do you think you're doing? Because I didn't know you could do that. I said, what the bloody hell do you think you're doing? He said, what am I doing? He said, I'm making you sound like you can. He had a stutter. I'm making you sound like you can play that bloody thing. And he cut out the bum note, spliced it together, and then played it. And it's like magic. But
I think it's imperfections that make perfection. I really do. Like when I look back at some of like the greatest moments in music, to me, like the first one that just popped into my head was Aretha Franklin's "I'll Say a Little Prayer for You." That moment where she hits a note so big that she clips the microphone and it distorts a little bit. That's the payoff to me. That's like that's the chills part. You know what I mean?
Yes. It's the crack in everything where the light gets in. And as I've gone on, I've really embraced that. So that's why I would say to that 20-year-old kid, don't worry about the bum note. Listen to it in a different way. Maybe that's pretty damn good. I mean,
yeah. Is a Steely Dan record that took years to make better than a Sun Studios record that took a few hours? I'm not so sure. I think there's a place for both of them, but it's all about telling our stories, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah, stories. Yeah, story is the fabric which connects everybody and everything.
Last question, David J. What still gives you joy?
Spark of creativity, really, and the unpredictable entering into that, and the embracing that, and it coming as revelation, and the realization that you, as the artist, are a conduit as much as anything else. And so the key thing is to be open and receptive, to allow that mysterious force, whatever it is, to flow through you, and then to find its individual expression through your individuality.
Very good. I like it. All right. Well, that was great. The Bad Decisions podcast was produced by Brock Workman of Herdat Entertainment. Be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. My book, The Big Book of Bad Decisions, is available for purchase wherever books are sold. A special thanks to today's guest, David J. For joining me, I'm your host, Scott Nathan. Thanks for listening.